Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second of the ANU Below Zero consultation processes. This one's on behavioural change. So before we go into the discussion, we've got a welcome from Paul Duldig, which is pre-recorded, and Juliet will show that now.
Hi, I'm Paul Duldig, Chief Operating Officer at the Australian National University. I'd like to welcome you to the ANU Below Zero consultation. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where I am today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations. As we're all too aware, after the unprecedented bushfires, air pollution and heat that affected much of our east coast last summer, and with fire now wreaking havoc up and down the west coast of the US, climate change is already having devastating impacts all over the world. As a world leader in many areas of climate and energy research, ANU hosts over 450 climate and energy researchers and runs over 130 climate and energy related courses across the university. Our research and education programs are leading the way in developing solutions to the challenges that climate change presents. As the National University, ANU has also a responsibility to lead the nation in line with the world's best practice on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. However, at the moment, ANU activities are contributing to climate change through the direct and indirect emission of significant quantities of greenhouse gases. Further to this, simply reducing our emissions to net zero is no longer enough to maintain a safe and stable climate. To keep global temperature rises to well below 2 degrees Celsius, and if possible to 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will also need to draw down and store or use greenhouse gases. In February, the ANU Council passed a resolution recognising the urgency of action required to address climate change. They also committed us to reducing the university's greenhouse gas footprint to below zero through its own operations. The resulting ANU Below Zero initiative is a vital strategic priority for ANU. It is a strong demonstration of our integrity, our emphasis on societal transformation, and our commitment to excellence in everything we do. With the university's extremely difficult financial situation, this consultation process is taking place at a very challenging time. Despite the stress that ANU is under, I'm proud that we are not shying away from developing this initiative. After all, we'll be dealing with the impacts of climate change long after COVID has passed. But there's no doubt that COVID-19 and our financial situation makes the operating environment for this initiative more difficult. Transitioning the university to below zero emissions is no small task. We'll need to look at every aspect of the way that we operate. We'll need to reconsider everything from how we integrate greenhouse gas implications into our decision-making, to how we use energy, how we travel, what we buy, and what we eat. That's why I'm calling on all of you to engage with this vital mission. Here at ANU, we have an incredible brains trust. I encourage all of you to contribute your ideas based on your personal perspectives, as well as your research and professional expertise, to help us transition to become a below zero emissions university as rapidly as possible. I look forward to your contributions soon. Thank you.
And thank you to Paul. So thanks everyone for joining today. And before I start, I'd like also to acknowledge the traditional owners on who we meet. In my case, it's the Ngunnawal people. So this workshop is being recorded and will be shared. So if you don't want your comments recorded, please submit them anonymously. You can do that through the below zero email, belowzero@anu.edu.au at any time. So as we know, this is an opportunity for ANU staff, students and others to contribute to this process in relation to reducing our emissions footprint, and to work together to bring our collective knowledge in train to deal with this issue. This consultation process finishes on October the 20th, so we've still got some time to go in consultation, and there's another 5 workshops akin to this to follow, the next one being next Tuesday on travel. So if you, and besides these workshops, which are a bit more of an interactive way of approaching it, you can also submit your ideas through the Idea Note platform, and so you should all have connections to that. And as well, you can engage directly with the Below Zero team, Juliet, Amaya, Claire de Castella, and myself and others. So today we've got 3 speakers. We're really lucky to have 3 great speakers here. And these are going to give very short presentations, so it leaves plenty of time for discussion as a group. So if, when you produce comments or suggestions and ideas, please keep those short, so snappy, less than a minute if possible, so everyone has a chance to interact and we have a chance to discuss what's been raised. To do this, just use the raise hand function, which is down in the participants list component of Zoom, and then wait for me to just ask you to speak. And we'll go over the protocol for this again in a few minutes. But first, our first speaker is Dr. Samantha Stanley. So she's a research fellow in the Research School of Psychology, and she specialises in applied psychological theory and research to societal challenges. And amongst other things, Samantha and Zoe ran the recent survey of ANU attitudes to climate change generally and below zero specifically, and she's done a great job with that survey. So anyway, away you go, Sam.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hope those slides are sharing okay.
Yep.
Yep, perfect. So hello everyone. As Mark said, I'm a researcher in the School of Psychology, and I'll take you through the different strategies that are used to promote behaviour change. Firstly, for some context, based on the survey that Mark mentioned, we can think of action to reduce emissions in a few different ways. So we can think about it coming from the top down, so the ANU implementing new policies or initiatives, and the bottom up, so there'll be staff and students engaging with these individual behaviour changes. So this slide here shows one of our results from our recent survey, and we asked people who's responsible for reducing emissions. So here we can see that most people picked that middle option. So it's equally the responsibility of the university and its community members to take action. So this suggests that we're really well placed to introduce these behaviour change initiatives that require some community buy-in, because it looks like we've got that buy-in from both sides here. So now thinking about social psychology research, we know that one powerful influence on our behaviour is the people around us. So we've got things like social comparison. If we receive feedback on our behaviour and we find out that other people are doing better than us, so you might see this kind of feedback on your power bill, that usually prompts us to shift down towards the more pro-environmental norms, so conserving energy. We can also communicate social norms through messaging campaigns. So the key is to get across that the pro-environmental behaviour is what most other people do, and it's the right thing to do. And if we're dealing with an uncommon behaviour like biking to work, we can still use social norms by indicating how this is increasing over time. So that's a dynamic norm. So more and more Canberrans are taking their bike to work. So we know that at a basic level, people tend to do what other people are doing. So we try and fit in and follow the social norm. But it also depends on how strongly we we identify with those others. So the more we feel like we're part of that group, the more we're influenced by that group's norms. So one thing that we could do is try to promote an ANU identity that's very green and pro-environmental. And our survey already indicates that we do have a very green community here. So over 90% of people who responded to our survey reported being highly concerned about climate change. And that compares to just under 50% in the general population. So communicating this clearly and trying to ensure that every ANU staff and student member feels like they're part of this could help that norm be more influential. There are also various ways to use incentives to promote behaviour change, and I'll use coffee as an example for this one because there's quite a bit of research on this. What we can do is offer a discount for things like keep cups, and that the research shows reduces reliance on disposable cups. And what's even more effective is disincentives. So following this example, that would be an extra charge to use a single-use cup. And that works a little bit better because we tend to be more averse to losses than we are enticed by incentives. And you can think about applying this idea to a whole lot of different behaviours and to individuals or groups. So it could involve introducing some friendly competition between halls of residences, schools and office buildings, getting them to try and reduce energy use or travel the furthest by green transport modes. So you'd have rewards for those with greatest improvement, or if you want to tap into that loss aversion, you'd have the removal of rewards for those who are not changing. Something else that's unique about the ANU is that we have a relatively transitory population. So you can think about cohorts of students that come and go. So while this is a challenge in many ways for behaviour change, it's also an opportunity to capture people when they're in the right time for change. So we know that people who have just moved or are in some kind of transition period, so starting a new job or starting university, are more likely to travel behaviours. So perhaps we could take advantage of this by developing some kind of welcome pack that promotes cycling, includes bike maps or bus timetables for those new arrivals. And we know based on research that information provision alone isn't always effective, but this could be where we also communicate this green ANU identity to try and establish those expectations and norms early. So I think that's my time up, and I really look forward to hearing what you come up with and how these strategies or others might look at the ANU. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Samantha. You not only produced some really nice data there, but also some really good suggestions to carry forward. And one of those, the introduction pack, could well come up again in the next consultation on transport and travel. So, and our next short speaker is Susan Helya. So Susan's the Director of Residential Experience at the Office of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor on Student and University Experience. And today she'll be discussing opportunities for incentivising more climate-friendly behaviour in ANU residential facilities. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks everyone for the opportunity to share the perspective from a residential experience perspective. So there's really strong interest in the residential communities in sustainability and reducing the carbon footprint. So that's a really good foundation on which to contribute to the ANU reducing its carbon emissions below zero. We have a challenge though, because we provide the housing for in an ordinary year for around 6,000 people, and so it turns out that the residences are one of the highest places of emission across the entire campus. The commitment of residential students to contribute to a more sustainable campus is demonstrated by a whole lot of things that happen in residences, including community gardens, recycling programs. They have shared buses for communal transport rather than individual transport, and they have a focus on waste reduction. There's an example in one of the residences where it was recognised that there was a high level of food waste that was being collected every meal service. And so the students worked with the staff and with the food contracting service, the dining contracting service, to think through what was going on with this. What we found was that dining room didn't have a system for people being able to go back for seconds. So a very simple problem. And so that meant that, as we see in food halls and in other places, that people might overload their plates and then be scraping that food into the bin at the end of the meal service. So we did implement a program to allow people to go back for seconds, and that reduced the food waste by hundreds of kilos a fortnight, which of course then reduces emissions in landfill. What we found though was that we needed to make an investment in ICT to allow for the alignment of the payment systems with a different approach to managing people being able to go back for seconds. So I guess one of the things I would say in terms of thinking through the ideas that are being considered today in the Idea Node platform, which I've looked at, and it looks like there's some really great stuff going on, we need to think about where do we need to make the investment to support the behaviour change that people have. There's really strong imperatives in the student community. Of course, around cost of living issues is a very significant imperative for students living on campus, as well as the broader issue around responsibility to the planet and sustainability on campus. We have some real challenges in the residences around short tenure. So, for example, people are on short tenures, which means that they might need to get rid of a fridge at the end of each year because they can't transport that back to where they're going to spend their time off campus. So, you know, some ideas around how to help people with managing their facilities and equipment in those between short tenures would be very good. Students also talk about feeling a lack of control. The infrastructure for things like heating is communal infrastructure. It's not managed at every room level. So then that's another example whereby we might need to line up behaviour change interventions with investment in other areas that allow for individual behaviours to be shaping the footprint rather than the communal infrastructure shaping the footprint. So the last thing I'd just say is that there is some quite good evidence from consumer research done by Energy Consumers Australia that was published last year but has been done over several years. And what that showed was that for people to change their behaviours, they need to have the knowledge, the willingness, the capacity and the opportunity to change. And that for different people, because of their particular circumstances, they will have different levels in each of those domains of ability to make change. So in terms of thinking through the ideas that have come up through the Ideas Note platform and more broadly, would really value the ideas being thought about in terms of how do we build knowledge, how do we build willingness, how do we build capacity, and how do we build the opportunity for students to really be part of the change process when they live in residences on campus. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susan. I really like that example of going back for seconds. And it's not just that you reduce emissions in the waste stream, but you actually reduce emissions in the whole value chain up to the point of that meal being put in front of the students. And so it's through the growing of the food and the transport and the processing of the food, etc. And so what seem to be small reductions in waste actually multiply as you go through that whole value chain analysis. So our next speaker is Stephanie Penales. So Stephanie is a Master's in Environment and Development student here at ANU, and she completed an internship on the Below Zero program in early part of this year. So she'll be providing an overview of learnings from that internship in relation to behavioural change, including discussion of requirement for mechanisms regarding ongoing student engagement, some of the points that Susan just made. And in that internship in particular, Stephanie looked at what was going on in other universities that could actually be applied and that we could learn from and short circuit that learning process so that we could actually adopt more efficient things quicker. On you, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'll just get this up. So good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Steph, and as Mark said, I'll be speaking about behavioural change strategies, particularly in waste management, and lessons that I learned from my report about the opportunities and challenges. So this report will be what informs my presentation. So just to begin, behavioural change is broadly defined as the transformation or modification of human behaviour. And as Samantha and Susan had mentioned, there are many different ways that this kind of behavioural intervention can occur. They could be nudges, instructions, feedback, such as the energy bill comparisons, modelling, making commitments, incentives, rewards, and competitions. So today, behavioural change is getting a significant amount of attention because there is growing agreement amongst academics, NGOs, and supranational organisations like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that behavioural change is necessary to limit emissions and global warming to the 1.5 degrees. Technology and policy changes and investment changes, while significant, are not enough to meet these global targets, and they have to be coupled with behavioural shifts from high carbon emitting lifestyles, particularly regarding meat consumption, air travel, and energy usage. Thankfully, today, there are many promising opportunities and applications of behavioural change. So during my research, I looked into strategies employed by universities worldwide, as Mark said, and these included the London School of Economics and Political Science or the University of Cambridge. And at the University of Cambridge, they used nudges to discourage meat consumption to reduce carbon emissions. So meat was removed from dining hall menus, plant-based foods were architecturally positioned at more strategic places to improve their sales. And this was also complemented with the provision of compost bins as well as water refill stations. And the strategies at University of Cambridge, as well as all the strategies I researched, they were supported by an emerging global behavioural change program called Green Impact. And they essentially guide universities through implementing behavioural campaigns and competitions across campus. And they use competition, incentives, and rewards to bring the whole community of staff and students and wider community to implement initiatives to change behaviours. However, these programs and general behavioural change had greater opportunities for success where there was top-down financial and political endorsement, when staff, students, and the community were engaged and empowered to change their behaviours by including them, like in this consultation. It was also more effective where there was communication and awareness campaigns through social media, for example. Accessible websites and platforms were valuable for universities to spread environmental awareness, to be transparent, and to also provide some pressure on themselves to actually maintain that behavioural change. However, this online communication and awareness campaign had to be translated into physical infrastructure as well to enable these behavioural shifts. So for example, if a compost bin is not near you or very accessible to you, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to resist just putting it in landfill. There were also opportunities for behavioural change when there were multiple strategies and interventions under a single umbrella strategy. It just enables streamlining many environmental initiatives together to increase collective impact. And lastly, and importantly, effective governance and monitoring of these behavioural change programs was also incredibly vital. However, there are significant practical limitations in not only first implementing these behavioural strategies, but also sustaining change in the long term to actually reduce carbon emissions. In the context of universities, key challenges and barriers include time itself and just having that commitment over time, inconsistent governance and monitoring, uncertain definitions in university policies, which enables poor monitoring and accountability, lacking financial capital to support behavioural change, student and staff turnover and transitoriness, like Samantha had mentioned, and as well as just shifting political agendas for behavioural change. This latter challenge was really important at the University of California because even though students and staff were really passionate about going zero waste, the supporting institutional policies and infrastructure wasn't really there, unfortunately. But hopefully through this consultation and this initiative, we can navigate through these current emergent opportunities and barriers and frame our discussion with these opportunities and barriers. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. So we come to the point where we sort of open this up for discussion. So just repeating the sort of etiquette and instructions for this process. So if you want to ask a question or make a point, raise your hand by using the raise hand function in the participants function down the bottom of the screen. If you could keep your comments and ideas relatively compact and short, preferably less than a minute, just so that everyone can have a chance to contribute. Seek to improve ideas rather than critiquing them and shooting them down. So sort of build on what's coming from others, and avoid jargon if you can. If you don't want to ask a question and speak up, feel free to put that up in the chat function rather than through the through the verbal sort of process. And if there's other comments you put in the chat function, we'll be saving the chat. And so we will take a record of that and incorporate that into what we're doing. So what we're just going to do is open it up for questions and points that people might want to make. So feel free.
I'm happy to say something.
Okay, Vivian.
Hi, Vivian Holmes. I'm at the College of Law. I think part of the trick here that all the speakers really have touched on is making it easy for people to do things that are environmentally the right thing to do. So, for example, if we look at the composting idea that's on the website of ideas, I think people will do that if there's a compost bin in the kitchen, or most people would do it, but they're not going to walk a bit further, most likely to do it. I mean, the idealists will, and some people never will, but the massive people in between will probably do things that are easy, relatively easy. And so I think that's part of the challenge, to find ways of making these things not require too much more effort. Like just as at home, you know, I'm sure we've all got compost bins right next to our other bins, and it's just so easy to do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my 2 bobs worth at the moment.
Thanks, Vivian. And I think that does come into some of the things that Susan was talking about. So that's the sort of the capacity and opportunity elements there. But putting barriers, even little barriers, can stop people from doing new things. And so in a sense, you need to remove that barrier while people habituate themselves to the new behaviour.
Yeah.
Are there other sort of points that people want to follow on from Vivian?
Hi, I'm Angela and I'm in the College of Science, and I just want to echo Vivian's sentiments. I looked into green initiatives for our college last year, and I met with a lot of people, both within ANU, and I also met with the head of the Environment Centre just to see what options we could do to increase our sustainability, because obviously in science it's something we house the CCI, and we should practice what we preach. So I did a lot of research and encountered the barriers that Steph talked about. So my passion, I suppose, is food waste, and so in the end I just ended up bringing a big container in and putting it in our staff kitchen, and just put compost on top, and I put signs around and encourage people to, if they had leftover things, just to put it in there. And I, every day or every couple of days, I would take it home with me and put it in my own compost. So it was a bit of an imposition on myself, but the first week it took a whole week to fill. And then as time went on, I was taking it home with me and emptying it every second day. So it was something people were certainly really keen to support and be a part of, and it prompted a lot of conversations, and it reinforced what Vivian just said about people are very keen, and there's this dormant, latent, environmental participation that people really want to take part of, but it's I think you've just got to start small, and I targeted something that was very important and something I cared about. And then I kind of thought about this idea of having, green ambassadors in every school or college or local area that could really support these things, and just to start, as small as possible, even if it is as clunky and bespoke as bringing in an old ratty food container and filling it and taking it home with compost to put in your own personal one. I think it's a bit of a case of every step and contribution can count.
Thanks, Angela. Great that you showed some leadership there and people took that up. And if I recall that one of the parties in the forthcoming ACT election has actually said that they'd be putting compost bins strategically around different suburbs, and there is, I think, a community group that actually does something similar at the moment. and so, you know, potential for leverage off some of those initiatives as well. I don't actually know a lot about that, but does anyone on the call know much about that?
Hello.
Hey, is it Betty?
Yes, Betty. Hi, I work for ACT No Waste, and what we call FOGO, which is Food Organics, Garden Organics, is something that the ACT is looking into in the next few years. It will be a transition from the current garden organics bins, but that will take some time. And what we're going to do in the meantime is focus on food avoidance, food waste avoidance. So rather than kind of offering the solution, yes, let's compost our waste, let's avoid all that waste that was grown and transported and refrigerated and done for food, for human consumption, and let's eat it instead, which has quite an impact on emissions. So yeah, that's like something we'd really like to highlight before we go and compost it, which is great, and we want to keep all that food waste out of landfill, but we want to avoid wasting it in the first place.
Thanks. Jennifer, are you following on this point?
Yes, thank you. I'm Jennifer from the Research School of Computer Science. I'm a lecturer. I think following on from that point, there are opportunities to try and embrace kind of zero waste principles. So looking at not just recycling, but potentially also how to avoid even producing recycling waste in the first place. And I mean, one of the challenges of that is also that sometimes there's an outlay of costs. So a simple example, if you wanted to stop buying cartons of orange juice and make your own orange juice, you can buy one of these things, but then there's an initial outlay of buying one of these things. So finding ways to support people to be able to make those changes in a way that also is viable for people as well. And I think another point I wanted to make is that there are a lot of students looking for projects at all levels, research projects, and a lot of really good ideas that I saw on the ideas board that could be explored by students as part of research projects in all different areas of the university at all different levels. So I think there's some kind of nice opportunities to align these initiatives also with the research that we're doing as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So there's a question come up, which is whether Stephanie's report will be available and also her presentation, and my understanding is yes, both of those will be.
Hi, Mark. Hi, this is Will Bloomfield from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. How are you?
Hi, Will.
Yeah,
do have you on the list. Are you following on from this point?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna make a really brief point that I missed the beginning, but just to note that the United Nations Environment Program has a new publication out this month called Little Book of Green Nudges. It's all about this behavioural change. So no doubt you're across that, but I just wanted to say we're going through a similar process here in DFAT in our operations, how to mainstream behavioural changes and checklists and all that sorts of things. So it's really valuable discussion. But I thought that would be a useful publication for you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Will. Okay. So Chalaka, you had a point.
Yep. Thank you, man. So it's actually a statement as well as a question. So my first statement is, I mean, most of us, we take decision based on, we take informed decisions. So such as if you have eco labels or Energy Star rating. So we fond of taking decision based on those information towards preserving the environment. So my question is for us, probably Stephanie, in her internship, have you come across how the students' behavior? Are they also follow these informed decisions in wider compared to wider community, or they don't even bother about those? Do you have any idea about that? Thanks.
Yeah, students were students in general, as the ANU report showed, like they do have those strong environmental tendencies already. So it was more about allowing them to actually enact those behavioural positive pro-environmental behaviours. In my report, I found that the way that I kind of discussed students was whether or not they were actively or passively engaged in behavioural change programs, because if students were passively engaged, they had a lot less empowerment and agency to uptake and sustain those behaviours in the long term. And so throughout my research, I found it important for students to be actively engaged, whether it be through consultation periods like this or actively engaged in the competitions in terms of forming their own teams. But about their specific behaviours themselves, that wasn't exactly the scope of my report. It was more seeing what is doable or not doable in terms of the program. But yeah, active engagement of students was key to their pro-environmental behaviours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stephanie. So on the question list, we've got Philip Taylor, then Dan, then Josue. So first, Philip.
Hi, thanks, Mark. Hi everyone. I'm Phil. I'm a postdoc at RSAA. I'm also the chair of the Sustainability Committee here. I just wanted to share a couple of things that we've done that have worked and that also that haven't worked from the point of view of behavioural changes. So like a few people have already mentioned, we also set up food waste bins in the kitchens, and the take up on that was really good. We've also been tracking how much, weighing the stuff that people put in the bins each week to try and track it, and sort of play the different kitchens off against each other or that sort of thing. Now, just as that was getting going, COVID started, and so we haven't actually put out those numbers yet because it's just been a big plateau. But yeah, that's something that's worked really well. Something that hasn't. So I'm guessing a lot of people here will be familiar with TerraCycle. They're a company that recycle things that are difficult to recycle and that you can't put in your yellow bin, for example. They have some free waste streams, and so I've sent emails around and said, if you want to bring these things in, I'll collect them all in one place, just within the school, and then we can send them off. And the uptake on that hasn't been very good. And so I think this is something again where we would need to actually put a disposal place, a receptacle in a communal area rather than saying I'll take it in my office. And then I guess the last thing I'll mention is I've also given a few presentations on sort of what I've learned just through my life wanting to reduce my waste and do these things, both to my school and also to other institutes. So it's harder to know how sort of that's affected people's behavior, but the response I've had has been very good. And so hopefully that sort of thing has also been useful, even if it wasn't the most well-attended talk. But yeah, thanks. That's just what I wanted to say.
So thanks, Phil. So a question came up in chat is who gets rid of the food waste and where do you put it? What do you do with it? Okay,
so most of the time, one of the PhD students takes it for their communal garden. Other times, my supervisor takes it because she is trying to grow all her own food at home, and so she just needs loads of compost. And so all my home compost goes to her, and she takes some of the school stuff as well.
Thanks, Phil. Sounds like a good use for it. So then we've got Dan.
Hello, how you going?
All good. You're on.
Great. So my name's Dan. I'm in the College of Science. I just wanted to say a few things. I think it was really good. The first presenter, sorry, I can't remember her name, was talking about incentives and disincentives for different behaviours. And obviously, with the coffee cup sort of thing, it's not maybe such a an applicable example because we're not selling so much stuff at ANU, but there's some really great work out of community-based social marketing, looking at just encouraging staff to do things like adjust their blinds appropriately, you know, for the heating and cooling of buildings overnight. And one of the big things in community-based social marketing is about using pilot groups. So doing testing of the different behaviours and incentives or disincentives that you're trying to use. So I think it'd be really great if we could see ANU doing some of those pilots to encourage these behaviour changes, you know, whether it's around transport to campus, whether it's about setting up the buildings for heating and cooling, and those sorts of things. So I think that would be really great, and ANU's got an awesome opportunity to sort of trial that and showcase and study the whole thing that they do, much more than most, say, community-based organisations or businesses that might try to do that work. And the second thing I really wanted to sort of bring out is that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for ANU, not at the behavioural level, but at sort of being a leader level in terms of, you know, there used to be a hot rot composter at the ANU. It broke down, it stopped using, but that's a real example of how ANU had this world-leading facility to deal with organic waste, to produce compost, you know, and it plugs into all of these ideas in science around doing research that's applicable and has an impact, and those sorts of things. So it'll be great to watch this space and see how that progresses. And the very last thing I wanted to say is I think there's a lot of possibility in the building's operation space in terms of whether it's policy or encouraging behaviour change, you know, around things like single-use coffee pods, or whether it's leaving lights on or turning the computers off. I think there's a lot of possibility for ANU, you know, looking at that thing of this has to be led by ANU and the people who participate at ANU, you know, working out how the institution can lead, and then the community can also lead and take up that challenge and implement what needs to happen. I think that's my piece. Not really a question, but I don't know if anyone wants to speak about the institutional role that ANU thinks it will play, or what behaviour changes ANU would like to see from people.
Thanks, Dan. That's exactly what this consultation process is about, is getting an understanding through the survey that Samantha and Zoe have done in relation to you know, people's views on responsibilities, levels of concern, levels of understanding, and this process, which is about generating ideas and particularly looking for synergies between ideas, and then looking at how we can implement that through various mechanisms. And you know, there is no, we're not looking for a monolithic sort of approach to this. What we really would like is a very dispersed approach where there's lots of different processes, you know, by students and by staff, and pressure from external bodies, engagement with the ACT government, which takes this forward in many different ways. I don't think this is about centralising processes. This is actually about supporting a whole range of different initiatives, because you know, there is such a diversity of things that we have to address. But one of the things, Dan, that you raised is that many things have been tried before in ANU and elsewhere, and that element of corporate sort of knowledge and history, which you just mentioned, you know, the hot rot system, that's one I hadn't actually encountered before. And so it's really important to, you know, get an understanding of what's been tried before, and if it didn't work or worked for a while, what happened that we can learn from and try to do better the second time round. So that sort of knowledge is just, I think, really valuable in these sorts of discussions. So if there's anyone who wants to follow up any points that Dan raised, there's an opportunity to do so here. Okay, if not, we'll go to Josue.
Well, actually, I want to follow a bit on that.
Anyway.
So yeah, thanks, Dan, for that. Yeah, that great comment. I guess what I had in my head is that perhaps, well, I will talk about my personal experience. The first time I tried to do a compost, actually, now that we'll be talking about this, I was terrified because I had no idea about how to do it, like all the steps. And I mean, I actually had a couple of friends that teach me how to do it. So I was thinking that perhaps a way that ANU could lead is by having a vegetable garden somewhere on campus that people can actually go and participate and learn. Because I think that something about the behavioral changes might be these challenging, so actually getting to know how to do things, which usually takes a lot of time and energy from an individual to actually do it. So perhaps if there's a more community-based interaction where people from all levels, like professors or students, are contributing to these kind of things, I mean, that might help with a lot of these waste, and even some of the waste, some of the food that might be waste at ANU could also go as a compost in there. I don't.
Thanks, Josue, and that's exactly the sorts of things where I think it's possible linkage between different ideas, which takes ideas and builds them into a sort of bigger package. And we also note, Josue, that you're speaking next Tuesday and on travel, and so there'll be an opportunity to hear more of your ideas then. Just before we move on, there's a question about this in the chat about the scope. Of what we're trying to do in below zero. So clearly what we're trying to address is what's called scope 1 and 2, which are both the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions. So direct are associated, say, with gas heaters on campus, indirect associated with off-site emissions from activities on campus. And then there's the scope 3 emissions. And so the scope 3 that we're looking at, because scope 3 can grow huge, it's right across our supply chains and all sorts of things. So we're still trying to figure out what aspects of scope 3 are within bounds or out of bounds for what we're trying to do here. And certainly things such as professional travel are within bounds, but then there's a whole series of scope 3 emissions, such as people travelling to and from ANU campuses for work, which is a scope 3 emission. But in a sense, there's a question about how much responsibility ANU has for that. And so I think what we'd be certainly looking at is influencing those scope 3 emissions associated with those types of activities, if not necessarily actually being responsible for and having them on our inventory, which we're trying to address within the Below Zero program. But Claire, you might want to just comment on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that would be great to get feedback from everybody in terms of what do you think ANU's role should be in terms of, obviously, in looking at scope 3 emissions. Is that something that we should be considering in more detail or not? And certainly, I mean, when we talk about travel, I think on Tuesday, we'll be talking about professional travel, and we're talking about travel to and from campus. And you could also argue that the university does have a responsibility to provide facilities that will enable people to reduce their emissions from transport. But interested in any thoughts on that as well.
Thanks, Claire. So just looking at the chat, there was a comment or question in the chat about putting solar panels on ANU buildings, and that sort of thing was dealt with in our previous consultation on sort of buildings and installations. But clearly, that's a very visible example of activities that are associated with below zero. The challenge that we have at the moment, and I should say various buildings across ANU already have panels on their roof. The challenge at the moment, of course, is the financial situation, and any of those programs actually require capital outlays before we actually start to recoup the benefits, both in terms of savings in dollars and savings in greenhouse gas emissions. But and noting too that ANU is part of the ACT, is at least at the Acton campus, where we use renewable electricity from the ACT's power supply. So it's not necessarily reducing emissions, except in the sense of offsetting emissions elsewhere in the network. But we are exploring different finance models that would potentially mean that that capital for the outlay doesn't necessarily come off the immediate balance sheet of the ANU, because obviously there's implications in terms of the budget that we just heard the Vice-Chancellor talking about just a short while ago. So that's definitely in scope for below zero, but not the key focus here of this meeting, which is focusing on behavioural change. So there was a comment about, which came from Phil, about making a communal garden at RSAA, but you know, I guess there's possibilities to sort of expand that. And you know, are there any experiences in terms of communal gardens from other people elsewhere that may help in terms of making that fly? No, it doesn't seem so. Okay, yeah, Susan's just pointed out there's an active discussion and idea note about community gardens, and several halls have food growing on a small scale. So maybe the question there is actually about how do you scale that up and expand it and integrate it with some of the other things we've talked about. Okay, so if there's any other questions, just a quick note. I gather from that Tricia, you've got some ideas that you want to float. Patricia? Tricia Wilden? No? Okay. Okay, so are there any other people who want to make a point, put an idea on the table at this point in time?
Yeah, could I just ask, when I looked into some of these things last year and I met with ANU Green and I talked about composting and communal gardens and things like that, they sort of, for want of a better term, kind of shut a lot of the ideas down based purely on a legal perspective. They kind of said there would be legal implications, and they took a sort of a very litigious view of some of these issues. And I just wanted to ask, to what extent do those issues need to be considered and incorporated in these discussions? Because it sounded like, you know, it was a great idea to have composting on campus, but you know, the legal office would kind of tear holes in it for XYZ reasons. And I just wanted to see to what extent, yeah, how we measure the legal implications of a lot of these ideas.
Yeah. Thanks, Angela. So I think you know, various things that you know, have health and hygiene implications, for example, need to be viewed within the context of, say, food hygiene laws and regulations, and so that needs to come into play. Having said that, is that there's often been innovative ways of managing those risks and managing the implications, the legal and other implications, and so you know, I think often it's about taking a you know, a slightly different view on this and engaging in a way that you know, allows us to overcome those barriers. So probably got time for one more question or comment, and that's from Nick.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. I'm also up at the Mount Stromlo Observatory and on the Sustainability Committee up there. And one of the things that we'd talked about is how in academia there's often a lot of flights and air travel being done, and ways we can sort of encourage alternative options, in particular, you know, buses and trains where it's available. And prior to a whole bunch of budgetary sort of restrictions that came in, our thinking was that we could sort of offer financial incentives for people to take alternative, more green transport options when they, say, if they fly over to Europe or something and then they're going between countries in the area, they could take trains. But I was wondering if maybe people here had some ideas about how we could encourage more green transport options for academic purposes.
Thanks, Nick. So I don't know that I have a direct answer for that at the moment, and hopefully that will come through Idea Note. But one possibility is if we generate sort of a personal carbon account associated with various staff and students, then they're, through transparency or even just through personal comparison with the norms, the thing that Samantha was talking about earlier, may actually tend to encourage people to take low emissions options there. And just noting that this I think will come up next week in the travel engagement session that Josue is talking at, and so don't assume that it's going to be dealt with here. I think engage in that travel process as well, and put that sort of idea into that, and you may actually have people in the audience there who can build on that idea and make it happen. So, okay, so I think probably there's just, there was a point from Tom Worthington, which was just about going online, online teaching. It's sort of somewhat behavioural, but do you want to do a very quick job there, Tom, on the behavioural aspects?
Yes, if I could. First of all, is the audio working?
It is, I can hear.
Excellent. It was to make the point that it is possible to reduce energy use and emissions by moving more of the teaching online, keeping in mind avoiding fudging the carbon accounting where you're simply moving the emissions from the campus to someone's home. And also in the case of international students, if we can do some of it online, that would help. We've done all this work with COVID-19 to get more people up to speed with how to do these things. And it'd be nice if we could retain that while still having a campus. But I suggest we could have many more students who come to campus part of the time. That was about all. I put some details in the post in the system. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. And there's a whole series of trade-offs associated with online versus at home activities, which I think we will need to reevaluate and reflect on over the next months. And so we need to have a very honest view of the pros and cons of the different options. So I think it will come into play much more strongly. So I'll just wrap it up at this point, but I want to thank everyone for both joining here and engaging in the process. We really appreciate you doing that and spending valuable time and yet another Zoom meeting. But just noting that there's 5 more consultations of this type in relation to below zero over the next 3 weeks or so. And so this consultation will go to October the 20th. So until then, the Ideas Note platform is open for putting in your own ideas, commenting on others, and sort of building some momentum. And so we really encourage you to engage both in these engagement sessions, the webinar sessions, as well as through that Idea Note platform. And of course, talk to your staff, talk to your students, and talk to your friends, colleagues, family about this, because we really want the sorts of discussions and ideas to come from as widely as possible and to influence as widely as possible. Anyway, thanks very much again, and thanks particularly to Claire and Juliet and Lamise for organising this, and we look forward to engaging with you over the next few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark and the presenters.